So in this lecture, we're going to move on from just the general plot summary and into a reading of the poem. There's lots of ways to read this poem. There's lots of ways to read every literary text. But in this reading, we're really going to focus on the theme of Beowulf's arrogance, the way in which Beowulf is, celebrated as a great hero in many ways, but who is shown to have this flaw in his character, which is that he really thinks a lot of himself and believes a lot about his abilities, and is really just kind of an arrogant person, and that's something that sort of undercuts his heroism throughout the story. One of the really interesting things about this poem, that's part of why it's so celebrated as a classic, is the way it has this ambivalence about Beowulf's heroism. Beowulf uses violence to kill monsters, and monsters are bad, we can all agree about that. But at the same time, his reliance on violence fuels his arrogance and leads ultimately to his downfall and the suffering of his people. Remember in part 1, when the young Beowulf fights Grendel, every time he succeeds, the narrator gives us this little hint about his arrogance and kind of undercuts what's so great about what he's done. He kills Grendel, but he didn't predict that Grendel's mother was out there. He didn't think that there would be some consequence for this. Then he kills Grendel's mother, but he doesn't manage to save Heorot, and we'll sort of talk about that in a second. Beowulf goes home happy with himself, believing that he's won, but we know as readers that he's lost. We're given little clues throughout the text that as amazing as what he did was, he hasn't really accomplished his primary task of protecting the Danes and saving Heorot. In part 2 also, we see the old Beowulf's arrogance kind of, having reached a ripe old age, like a bottle of fine wine. His arrogance makes him believe that he can save his people by killing the dragon. He thinks he can do that by himself, and that is what causes the doom of his people. If Beowulf had just sat it out and, let some younger guys help him, he's like, the old dad who insists on lifting the heavy box and then he throws his back out. That's Beowulf all over. And his arrogance and his inability to admit that he can't control everything and do everything, and that his violence won't solve everything, that is a major subtext of the poem. We start to get these little clues about Beowulf at the very beginning of the text. Now, you've seen this passage before, the first part anyway. It talks about how the fortunes of war favored Hrothgar, friends and kinsmen flocked to his ranks, young followers, a force that grew to be a mighty army. And so Hrothgar's mind turned to hall building. He handed down orders to build a great mead hall meant to be a wonder of the world forever, Heorot, right? That hall towered, its gables wide and high, and awaiting a barbarous burning. That doom abided, but in time it would come. Before Grendel has been introduced, before Beowulf has shown up, before anything has happened, from the moment it's built, the narrator tells us that this hall is going to burn down. Somebody is going to destroy Heorot. And this undercuts the entire first part of the poem, right? If Beowulf's aim is to cleanse Heorot so that it can stand and be enjoyed by the people, it's not going to work, actually. It's going to burn down, and whatever Beowulf does is not going to stop or prevent that. And that's something that right at the beginning undermines his heroism and, undercuts his claims for his greatness. So in this context, it's difficult to not read Beowulf's arrival and his speech to Hrothgar as a little bit of humble bragging on his part. He says, "Greeting to Hrothgar, I am Higelac's kinsman, one of his hall troop. When I was younger, I had great triumphs. Then news of Grendel, hard to ignore, reached me at home. Sailors brought stories of this legendary hall, how it lies deserted, empty and useless once the evening light hides itself under heaven's dome. So every elder and experienced councilman among my people supported my resolve to come here to you, because all knew of my awesome strength." Beowulf is there to save Heorot. He is there to fix the problem. We already know that whatever success he has will be temporary. And it's really hard not to read this as a relatively cocky statement on his part, talking about his great triumphs and his awesome strength. He's performing subservience to Hrothgar. Obviously, he thinks he's pretty great. Now, it seems at first that Beowulf's arrogance is well-founded. Of course, he is able to kill Grendel. He accomplishes that amazing heroic deed, and he's celebrated for it. But then, of course, Grendel's mother comes off the mere, attacks again, and kills Hrothgar's dear friend Ashura. And after Hrothgar confronts Beowulf about this, Beowulf's response is to call for more violence and, to continue the feud. He says, Hrothgar, do not grieve. It is always better to avenge dear ones than to indulge in mourning. Think about that. It's always better to act for vengeance than it is to grieve those who have been lost. For every one of us living in this world means waiting for our end, so let whoever can win glory before death. When a warrior is gone, that will be his best and only bulwark. The only hope, the only chance that humanity has is to fight, is to attack, to continue violent feuds. That's Beowulf's opinion. But already at this point in the story, we're starting to see that it might be a very limited worldview that he has, one which is tied to his arrogance, his own sense of himself, and his inflated sense of accomplishment, more than it is tied to what is actually, the right thing to do.